The Risian commander's blood splattered on the view screen as lasers sizzled through his skull. Alarms blared. Smoke poured from shattered control panels. The command center of Antares Station had become a charnel house in mere minutes as heavily armed human rebels surged in, gunning down the unprepared Risian guards. For centuries, the iron-fisted Risian Galactic Empire had exploited and oppressed its human subjects, pillaging their worlds and treating them as expendable slaves. Seething anger had built for generations. Now the human insurgency had struck a stunning blow by infiltrating one of the Empire's most critical outposts. This was humanity's chance to show the galaxy they would no longer kneel to alien tyrants. Grizzled rebel leader Matthew Henry strode past mangled corpses to the primary comm panel, his face grim and determined. This assault was deeply personal for him. Risian troops had massacred his family during a crackdown on dissent years ago. He slammed a blood-stained fist on the transmit button, preparing to broadcast a fateful message to billions across the subjugated human worlds. This is Matthew Henry of the Human Liberation Front, transmitting from the captured Imperial Station Antares. Let this blow against our oppressors signal the start of our uprising. I call upon all humans to rise as one and cast off the shackles of Risian domination. No longer will we toil as slaves. No longer will our children be bled dry to feed their insatiable greed. The age of cringing obedience is over. Now we fight for our freedom, for our very survival as a species. As his words echoed across the stars, stunned Risian leaders realized this was no mere act of terror by a handful of malcontents. It was the spark igniting a firestorm of rebellion across their crumbling empire, as human world after world erupted in open defiance, emboldened by the rebels' daring strike. The once omnipotent alien regime began to grasp the true depth of human fury and the deadly reckoning that awaited if they failed to contain mankind's uprising. The stage was set for a cataclysmic battle that would reshape the destiny of the galaxy forever. Humanity was rising, and the Risians now faced an existential struggle to salvage their empire from the human hurricane roaring to life. As the rebellion surged across the stars, the Risian Empire scrambled to contain the firestorm of human defiance. Imperial warships clashed with rebel fighters in brutal space battles over a dozen systems. On the ground, human guerrillas waged a relentless campaign of hit-and-run attacks, striking Risian bases and supply lines before melting back into the shadows. Armed with captured Risian tech they'd reverse-engineered, the rebels were a far deadlier foe than the overconfident Empire had anticipated. On the industrial world of Karis, Zoe Nyagi crouched in the pre-dawn gloom, her dark skin glistening with sweat as she surveyed the target through macro binoculars, a heavy Imperial weapons depot ringed by sentry guns and patrolling war droids. She turned to her waiting rebels, their lean faces hard with grit. Remember the plan. We hit them fast and hard. We grab the weapons and we get out. The Empire won't know what hit them. For the rebellion. For the rebellion, her fighters hissed back. Heart hammering with anticipation, Zoe led them in, the rebels flowing like vengeful wraiths through the compound's defenses. Risian guards barely had time to shout before throats were slit, skulls smashed, bodies twitched, and went still. In minutes, the arsenal was theirs. Zoe hefted a sleek plasma rifle from an opened crate and grinned fiercely. The Empire's own weapons would be its undoing. Within days, armed with their new toys, her rebels had routed the Imperial garrison and seized control of the planet, inspiring dozens more worlds to rise up and join the fight. Incensed by the rebels' string of audacious victories, the Risian Emperor dispatched his most brutal commander to spearhead the Imperial counterattack. General Zircon was infamous for his pitiless tactics and volcanic temper. Stalking onto the bridge of his dreadnought, the Void Scythe, Zircon snarled at the assembled officers. I want the rebel scum crushed. I want them driven before us like whimpering cattle. I want the worlds that defy us scoured to bare rock and ashes. There will be no mercy, no quarter. We will drown this pathetic uprising in blood and make the human filth rue the day they dared challenge Risian supremacy. Zircon's first target was the planet New Babylon, a hotbed of rebel activity. The general subjected the world to a vicious orbital bombardment, ion cannons and plasma warheads reducing proud cities to flame-scorched rubble. Hundreds of thousands of civilians perished in the onslaught, the planet's surface churned a hellish wasteland. Into the blasted ruins, Zircon unleashed his most fearsome enforcers, elite hunter-killer squads of Risian death troopers, gene-forged super soldiers in midnight black armor wielding devastating weaponry. Leading the merciless purge was Captain Zaloth, a ruthless killer with the unblinking amber eyes of a viper. The death troopers moved with lethal efficiency, relentlessly stalking the dazed and battered human survivors through the apocalyptic landscape. Resistance was met with overwhelming firepower. Screams echoed and blood painted the rubble as Zaloth's killers slaughtered without pity, Risian justice meted out at the end of a gun barrel. Watching the carnage from orbit, a tight smile split Zircon's craggy face. Let the galaxy witness the price of defiance. Let the humans realize the futility of challenging Risian might. The Empire would drown the rebels in their own blood and grind their worlds to dust. This paltry uprising would be short-lived indeed. But unbeknownst to Zircon, at that very moment, a secret transmission was speeding through hyperspace to the rebel leadership. Jenna Skari, one of the rebellion's most daring operatives, had spent months posing as a lowly maidservant in the Imperial Palace on Zephyria Prime. Her diligence and cunning had been rewarded with a priceless intelligence coup, detailed schematics of Zircon's invasion plans. It was data that could change the course of the war if Jenna could get it into rebel hands. Discovery would mean a slow, screaming death at the Empire's hands. But Jenna had sworn her life to the rebel cause. She would do whatever it took to bring the Risian tyrants to their knees. This was humanity's war now, a battle for freedom, or extinction. There could be no turning back. The secret transmission from Jenna Skari streaked through hyperspace, carrying with it the hopes of the human rebellion. As the data packet arrived at its destination, Matthew Henry's eyes widened. He immediately called an emergency meeting of the rebel leadership. Hours later, Matthew stood before a gathering of key rebel figures in a hidden bunker on Avalon. The room buzzed with tension as he addressed the assembled group. "We've received critical intelligence from our operative inside the Imperial Palace," Matthews said, his voice grave. "The time has come to unite our forces and strike decisively against the Empire." Zoe Nyagi, fresh from her triumph on Karis, leaned forward. "What did the intel reveal?" "Details of the Empire's invasion plans," Matthew replied. "This information could turn the tide of the war, but only if we act quickly and decisively." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Jax Raven, his scarred face set in a fierce grin, pounded his fist on the table. "Then let's hit them hard. My fighters are ready for action." Matthew nodded. "We will, but first, we need to formalize our alliance. No more scattered cells. From this day forward, we fight as one." Over the next several hours, heated debates raged as the rebels hammered out the structure of their new organization. In the end, they emerged united under a new banner, the Free Terran Alliance. With Matthew elected as Supreme Commander and Zoe and Jax as his top lieutenants, the newly formed alliance wasted no time in putting their stolen intel to use. A series of coordinated strikes crippled Imperial supply lines and freed thousands of human slaves. But even as the alliance celebrated these victories, a chilling message arrived from Jenna Skari. Her transmission, garbled and cut short, spoke of a terrifying new Imperial weapon called Project Nemesis. Matthew's face was grim as he briefed his inner circle. "We need more information. I'm authorizing a high-risk mission to infiltrate the research facility on Nexus Prime." Damien Hex, a wiry man with cold eyes, stepped forward. "My team can get it done, sir." Days later, Damien's infiltration squad slipped past the energy barriers surrounding the Imperial facility on Nexus Prime. They moved like ghosts through dimly lit corridors, disabling security systems and evading patrols. In the facility's central data core, Damien's fingers flew over holographic interfaces, extracting terabytes of classified data. Suddenly, alarms blared. "We've been made!" one of his team shouted. Laser fire erupted as Imperial guards converged on their position. Damien and his squad fought their way out, leaving a trail of destruction in their wake. They barely managed to reach their stealth ship and blast off-world, the stolen data secured. Back at Alliance headquarters, the rebel leaders poured over the infiltration team's hall. Horror dawned on their faces as they realized the true nature of Project Nemesis, a weapon capable of destroying entire star systems. "If the Empire deploys this," Zoe said, her voice tight, "it's over. They'll annihilate every rebel-held world." Matthew's teeth gritted. "Then we find it first and destroy it. Spread the word to every Alliance cell. This is now our top priority." As news of Project Nemesis spread, humans across the galaxy flocked to join the rebellion. Training camps on hidden worlds swelled with new recruits, all burning with the desire to save their species from extinction. Meanwhile, aboard the Void Scythe, General Zircon raged at the security breach on Nexus Prime. He turned to Captain Zaloth, his most trusted enforcer. "I want every officer in this fleet vetted for loyalty. Execute anyone you even suspect of disloyalty." Zaloth's reptilian eyes gleamed. "It will be done, my lord." As Zircon dreamed of unleashing Project Nemesis on the rebel worlds, the members of the Free Terran Alliance raced against time to locate the superweapon. Both sides knew that their next moves would determine the fate of humanity and the future of the galaxy itself. Matthew Henry's fist slammed onto the holotable, scattering the projected star charts. "We need a new strategy. Now!" The rebel leaders exchanged grim looks. They'd been outmaneuvered at every turn, their victories Pyrrhic at best. Now, with Project Nemesis looming over them, extinction seemed inevitable. "I have a plan," Matthew said, his voice low and intense, "but it's risky as hell." Zoe Niagi leaned forward, eyes sharp. "We're listening." Matthew outlined his audacious scheme: infiltrate the Imperial shipyards at Zinthos, steal the Nemesis schematics, and cripple the project before it could obliterate them all. "It's suicide," Jax Raven growled. "Maybe," Matthew conceded, "but it's our only shot." He turned to a lanky figure lounging in the corner. "Cal Varro, you up for leading this?" Cal's lips curled into a cocky smirk. "About time you asked, old man. I was getting bored." Within hours, Cal had assembled his team. Naira, a lithe assassin with eyes like frozen steel. Zek, a tech prodigy who could coax miracles from circuitry. And Rojan, a grizzled veteran who'd survived a dozen Imperial purges. They trained relentlessly, honing their skills to razor sharpness. Cal drilled them mercilessly in Imperial protocols and mannerisms. One slip could mean instant death. Finally, the day arrived. Disguised as an Imperial patrol, they slipped past the Zinthos perimeter. Cal's heart hammered as they docked, praying their forged credentials would hold. They did. The team moved swiftly through the sprawling shipyards, dodging patrols and slicing through security systems. Zek's fingers flew over terminals, planting false alarms to draw guards away from their true objective, the central data core. They were meters from their goal when alarms blared. A squad of midnight armored death troopers materialized, plasma rifles raised. "Go!" Rojan bellowed, laying down covering fire. "I'll hold them off." Cal hesitated for a split second, then nodded grimly. They plunged ahead as Rojan's defiant battle cry echoed behind them. In the data core, Zek worked feverishly to download the Nemesis files, while Cal and Naira fought off waves of Imperial reinforcements. Plasma bolts sizzled past, scorching consoles and leaving ozone-tinged air. "Done!" Zek shouted triumphantly. They fought their way back to their ship, leaving a trail of Imperial bodies in their wake. Naira's vibroblade flashed as she cut down the shipyard commandant, buying them precious seconds to escape. As they blasted away from Zinthos, plasma cannons tracking their trajectory, Cal allowed himself a moment of exultation. They'd done it. They had the plans. Now they could. A priority transmission cut through the static. Cal's blood ran cold as he decoded the message. Project Nemesis wasn't one superweapon. It was an entire fleet. And it was already under construction. Cal's hands shook as he input the coordinates for the rebel base. They'd succeeded beyond their wildest expectations, and in doing so, had discovered a threat beyond their worst nightmares. As their ship streaked through hyperspace, Cal knew the real war was only just beginning. Cal's face was ashen as he delivered the news to the Alliance leadership. Project Nemesis isn't one superweapon. It's an entire fleet of planet-killing dreadnoughts. A heavy silence fell over the war room. Matthew Henry's fist tight as he absorbed the devastating implications. "How many?" Zoe Miyagi asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "At least a dozen," Cal replied. "Maybe more." Jax Raven banged his head on the table. "We can't fight that. It's impossible." Matthew's eyes narrowed. He paced the room, mind racing. After a long moment, he turned to face his commanders. "We need to try something radical, something the Empire won't expect." "What did you have in mind?" Zoe asked. "Diplomacy." The room erupted in protests. Matthew raised his hands for silence. "I know it sounds insane, but hear me out. We open secret channels with Imperial ministers. Feel out if there's any appetite for negotiation." "They'll never go for it," Jax growled. "Maybe not," Matthew conceded, "but we have to try. The alternative is extinction." Over the next weeks, Matthew and veteran diplomat Aiden Cross reached out through clandestine backchannels. To their shock, a small faction within the Imperial hierarchy agreed to talks. The neutral space station, Argus, served as the meeting ground. Matthew's stomach churned as he stepped off the shuttle, flanked by Cross and a small security detail. Across the hangar bay, a contingent of Imperial officials waited. At their head stood a statuesque woman with sharp features and piercing green eyes. "Senator Arya Xylus," she said, extending her hand. "Welcome to Argus, Commander Henry." Matthew shook it, surprised by her firm grip. "Thank you for agreeing to these talks, Senator. I hope we can find a way forward that benefits all our peoples." Arya's lips quirked in a humorless smile. "We shall see." The negotiations were grueling. For days, both sides argued and bargained. The Alliance demanded autonomy, reparations, representation. The Empire balked, claiming such concessions would embolden other separatists. On the fifth day, as talks reached an impasse, alarms blared throughout the station. A frantic Imperial aide burst into the conference room. "Senators, commanders, we have an emergency broadcast from Imperial High Command." The holoprojector flickered to life, showing scenes of chaos, Imperial ships exchanging fire, troops battling in corridors. "This is Marshal Coven," a grim-faced officer announced. "General Zircon has gone rogue. His forces have seized control of the Nemesis shipyards in an attempted coup. All loyal Imperial units are ordered to—" The transmission cut off abruptly. Matthew and Arya locked eyes, mutual understanding passing between them. The stakes had just changed drastically. "We need to talk," Arya said, "now." Hours later, Matthew addressed the gathered Alliance leadership via encrypted holocall. "I know this will be difficult to accept," he said, "but we've negotiated an emergency ceasefire with the Empire. We're joining forces to stop Zircon." The outcry was immediate. Accusations of treason flew. Matthew let them vent before continuing. "I understand your anger, but this is our only hope. If Zircon activates those dreadnoughts, it's over for all of us, Imperial and Rebel alike." Slowly, reluctantly, the Alliance commanders came around to Matthew's reasoning. As the call ended, Zoe's hologram lingered. "I hope you know what you're doing, Matthew," she said softly. "So do I," he replied. Aboard the Imperial flagship Indomitable, Matthew stood beside Admiral Moritai on the bridge. The unlikely allies watched as their combined fleets assembled. "Zircon's forces have completed one dreadnought," Moritai reported. "We must stop it before the others come online." Matthew nodded grimly. "Then let's end this." As one, Imperial and Rebel ships surged toward the Nemesis shipyards. The final battle for humanity's future had begun. Begun had faded into an eerie silence. The combined Imperial and Rebel fleets hung in space, battered and scarred. Debris from destroyed ships drifted between them, a grim testament to the cost of their unlikely alliance. On the bridge of the Rebel flagship, now barely operational, Matthew Henry slumped in his command chair. Blood trickled from a gash on his forehead, and his left arm hung limply at his side. Through the flickering view screen, he watched the massive hulk of the Nemesis dreadnought. now a lifeless wreck. "Status report," he croaked. His tactical officer, face smeared with soot, shook her head. "We're dead in space, sir. Life support's failing. We need immediate evac." Matthew nodded grimly. "Send the signal. All hands abandon ship." As escape pods jettisoned from the dying vessel, Matthew's comlink crackled to life. Zoe Niagi's voice came through, tinged with static and urgency. "Matthew? Matthew, do you copy?" "I'm here, Zoe. Situation's FUBAR. Taking command?" "Affirmative. We're regrouping at secondary rendezvous point. Get there if you can." The transmission cut out as Matthew stumbled into an escape pod. As it shot away from his disintegrating flagship, he caught a glimpse of the Imperial command ship erupting in a ball of plasma. Admiral Moratai's fate unknown. Days blurred together as both sides licked their wounds. Matthew drifted in and out of consciousness in a makeshift med bay. When he finally regained full awareness, Zoe's face swam into view. "Welcome back," she said, relief evident in her voice. "We weren't sure you'd make it." Matthew tried to sit up, wincing at the pain. "Sit rep?" Zoe's expression turned grim. "It's a mess out there. Discipline's breaking down on both sides. We've got reports of rogue Imperial units attacking human settlements, and some of our own cells are refusing to stand down." Before Matthew could respond, an aide burst in. "Commander Niagi, urgent transmission from Senator Xylus." They hurried to the command center. On the main view screen, Senator Arya Xylus's face appeared, looking haggard but determined. "Commander Henry, Commander Niagi, I hope this transmission finds you well. We have a proposal to salvage this fragile piece." Matthew leaned forward, ignoring the pain in his ribs. "We're listening, Senator." Arya outlined her plan for a formal Imperial apology in joint ceremonies. As she spoke, Matthew exchanged glances with Zoe. It was a risky gambit, but perhaps their best chance to buy time and stabilize the situation. "We'll need tight security," Matthew said. "I'm assigning Damien Hex to oversee our team." Arya nodded. "Agreed. Let us hope this gesture can pave the way for lasting peace." As the transmission ended, Matthew turned to Zoe. "What do you think?" She sighed. "It's a long shot, but right now, a long shot is better than no shot at all." In the days that followed, tensions ran high as preparations for the ceremonies began. Damien Hex assembled his team, including the sharp-eyed Alara Vel. As they conducted security sweeps, Alara's instincts tingled. Something felt off. Her suspicions were confirmed when she intercepted encrypted communications between Imperial hardliner Zorgax and rogue Xentha Phalanx troops. She raced to alert Damien, knowing they had precious little time to prevent disaster. The day of the ceremony arrived. As dignitaries from across the galaxy gathered, Alara and her team moved swiftly to neutralize the threat. Plasma bolts sizzled through the air as they engaged Zorgax's assassins in the shadows of the Grand Hall. In the chaos, Zorgax himself slipped away, but his plan had been foiled, and the ceremony proceeded. Empress Ventara, her voice carrying across inhabited space, delivered her historic apology. "For centuries, the Rizian Empire has committed grievous wrongs against humanity," she intoned. "Today, we acknowledge those crimes and pledge to make amends. Let this be the dawn of a new era, one of partnership and mutual respect." Zoe stepped forward, her face a mask of composure. "On behalf of humanity, we accept this apology. May it mark the beginning of a just and equitable future for all sentient beings." As applause echoed through the hall, Matthew watched from his seat, still recovering from his injuries. He caught Arya's eye across the room. They shared a look of cautious hope, tinged with the knowledge that their work was nowhere near the end. In the days that followed, the galactic landscape began to shift. Human worlds transitioned to self-governance under Alliance oversight. Imperial garrisons departed, their absence both liberating and unsettling to populations long accustomed to their presence. Matthew, now back on his feet, found himself working alongside the recovered Admiral Moratai. Together they faced the monumental task of integrating humanity into the reformed Imperium's power structures. "It won't be easy," Moratai said as they pored over reports of continued unrest. There are still many who oppose this new order. Matthew nodded grimly. On both sides. But we have to make it work. The alternative is unthinkable. As night fell on the galactic capital, Matthew stood at a viewport, gazing out at the stars. Humanity had won its freedom, but at a terrible cost. Now came the hard part, building a lasting peace in a galaxy forever changed by war. Matthew's contemplation at the viewport was interrupted by a priority alert chiming on his comm. He turned, brow furrowed, to find Admiral Moratai's hologram materializing before him. "We have a situation, Commander," Moratai said, his voice tight. "Jax Raven's gone rogue." Matthew's face hardened. "How bad?" "Bad enough. He's rejected our overtures and disappeared with a cadre of hardliners. Intelligence suggests they're amassing weapons." "Damn it, Jax," Matthew muttered. He'd hoped his old comrade would come around given time. "Any leads on his location?" Moratai shook his head. "Nothing concrete, but that's not our only problem. Grand Admiral Drexen's fleet has broken away. They're harboring Zorgax." Matthew's mind raced, piecing together the implications. A power play against Empress Ventara? Precisely, and they're exploiting anti-human sentiment to bolster their ranks. The viewport stars blurred as Matthew paced. "We need to get ahead of this. Fast." "Agreed. That's why I'm appointing Lieutenant Commander Tavis Kane as our chief civilian attaché. He'll coordinate our joint efforts on newly liberated worlds." Matthew nodded. He'd worked with Kane before. The man had a knack for finding common ground in impossible situations. Over the following weeks, Kane proved his worth. Matthew watched as the lieutenant commander deftly navigated the minefield of post-war politics, brokering compromises between former rebels and imperial holdovers. But their fragile progress teetered on the edge of collapse when plasma fire erupted in the heart of New Alexandria's government district. Kane, caught in the crossfire, barely escaped with his life. Matthew arrived at the scene to find Kane being treated for burns, his uniform still smoldering. "What happened?" he demanded. Kane winced as a medic applied synth flesh to his wounds. "Assassin, nearly got me, but that's not the worst part." He locked eyes with Matthew. "It was Alara." Matthew felt the blood drain from his face. "Alara Vel? That's impossible. She helped us stop Zorgax." "I saw her, Matthew, with my own eyes." The investigation that followed revealed an ugly truth. Alara Vel, hero of the Resistance, had been turned, a deep-cover mole for the enigmatic Zora Brotherhood. In his quarters, Matthew stared at the damning evidence splayed across his holoscreen. Mission reports, comm logs, security footage, all pointing to Alara's betrayal. His hand hovered over the comm, dreading the call he had to make. Damien Hex's face appeared, etched with concern. "What is it, Commander?" Matthew's voice was hoarse. "It's Alara. She's compromised. We can't risk further infiltration." Understanding dawned in Damien's eyes, followed by a flash of pain. "You want me to—" "Terminate," Matthew confirmed, the word tasting like ash in his mouth. "I'm sorry, Damien. I know what she meant to you." Damien's expression hardened. "I'll handle it, sir." As Matthew severed the connection, reports flooded in of attacks on Imperial outposts. Jax Raven's handiwork, unmistakable in its brutality. Zoe Niagi's hologram flickered to life. "Matthew, we've got a problem. Drexen's forces have seized the Novalith shipyards." Matthew's blood ran cold. "Please tell me they haven't started weapons production." Zoe's grim expression said it all. "Something big. We don't know what yet, but intel suggests it makes Project Nemesis look like a child's toy." Matthew's mind raced. They needed eyes on the ground, hard evidence of what Drexen was building. And they needed it yesterday. "Assemble a strike team," he ordered. "We're going in." Hours later, Matthew found himself crouched in the cargo hold of a retrofitted freighter, surrounded by the best operatives the Alliance had to offer. At his side, Tavis Kane checked the charge on his plasma rifle. "Quite a change from negotiating trade agreements," Kane quipped. Matthew allowed himself a grim smile. "Welcome to the glamorous life of interstellar diplomacy." As the freighter dropped out of hyperspace, klaxons blared. They'd been detected. Matthew gripped his weapon, adrenaline surging. So much for the element of surprise, Kane muttered. The cargo bay doors hissed open, revealing the vast expanse of the Novolith shipyards. And there, dominating the vista, was a monstrosity that dwarfed anything Matthew had ever seen. Drexen's new superweapon hung in the void, half-constructed but already jam-packed with firepower. Matthew's throat went dry as he realized the full scope of the threat they faced. "My God," Kane whispered. "What is that thing?" Before Matthew could respond, plasma bolts sizzled past their heads. Drexen's security forces had found them. "Move!" Matthew shouted, returning fire as he charged into the fray. They had to reach the shipyard's central hub, find the weapons schematics, and get out alive. As Matthew dove for cover behind a stack of crates, he caught a glimpse of a familiar face among Drexen's troops. His heart sank. Jax Raven, his old friend and comrade, was fighting on the wrong side. Their eyes met across the battlefield, a moment of recognition frozen in time. Then Jax's plasma rifle swung towards Matthew's position. Matthew rolled, narrowly avoiding the searing bolt. "Jax, stop!" he shouted. "This isn't you!" But Jax's face was a mask of cold fury as he advanced, firing relentlessly. Matthew's heart sank as he realized his old friend was truly lost. Kane's voice crackled over the comm. "Commander, we've breached the central hub. You need to see this." Matthew fired a suppressing burst, forcing Jax into cover. He sprinted towards Kane's position, plasma bolts scorching the deck plates around him. Inside the hub, Matthew's jaw dropped. Holographic schematics filled the air, detailing a weapon of terrifying scale. "The Quantum Devastator," Kane said grimly. "It's worse than we thought." Matthew studied the plans, his stomach churning. This thing could vaporize entire worlds from light years away. An alert flashed across the display. Matthew's blood ran cold as he read the targeting data. "Terra Nova, they're going to hit Terra Nova." Kane swore. "We can't let that happen. Ideas?" Matthew's eyes darted across the schematics, searching for weaknesses. "There," he pointed. "The power core. If we overload it—" Kane nodded, already moving. "I'll set the charges. Cover me." As Kane worked, Matthew held off waves of security forces. The air crackled with ionized particles as plasma bolts crisscrossed the chamber. "Charges set!" Kane shouted. "We've got 2 minutes." They sprinted for the exit, alarms blaring. Matthew's lungs burned as they raced through twisting corridors. A deafening explosion rocked the station. Matthew stumbled, caught himself against a bulkhead. Through a viewport, he watched as the half-constructed Quantum Devastator tore itself apart in a cascade of brilliant energy. The shockwave slammed into Drexen's assembled fleet, sending ships spinning out of control. Fires bloomed across their hulls as reactors went critical. "We did it," Kane panted. "We actually did it." But Matthew's elation was short-lived. His comm crackled to life, Admiral Moratai's voice tight with urgency. "Commander, get your team out of there now. We've intercepted transmissions. This was only a prototype. Drexen has the resources to rebuild, bigger and deadlier." Matthew's heart sank. They'd won the battle, but the war was not nearly finished. As their extraction ship rocketed away from the dying shipyards, reports flooded in. Jax Raven's attacks on Imperial outposts were escalating, provoking harsh retaliation. Matthew watched grimly as footage played across the view screen. Imperial enforcers gunning down civilians on Tyrus, their screams chilling even through the tinny speakers. "This is exactly what Jax wanted," Matthew muttered, "to push both sides past the point of no return." Kane nodded solemnly. "And it's working. These images are spreading like wildfire. Zoe's going to have a hell of a time keeping liberated worlds in line." A priority transmission cut through their grim musings. Empress Ventara's face appeared, her expression grave. "Commander Henry, the situation has become untenable. Extremists on all sides threaten to tear apart everything we've worked for." She paused, her gaze piercing even through the hologram. "I'm naming you co-leader of a new transitional council. Your authority will be equal to my own." Matthew blinked, stunned. "Your Majesty, I don't know what to say." Say you'll accept, Ventara replied. The galaxy needs your moral authority now more than ever. Matthew glanced at Kane, saw the weight of expectation in his eyes. He took a deep breath, squaring his shoulders. I accept, Your Majesty, for the sake of lasting peace. As the transmission ended, alarms blared. New reports flooded in. General Zircon had resurfaced, allying with Drexen's forces. They're rebuilding the Quantum Devastator, Kane said, his voice tight. And Zircon set his sights on more than just Terra Nova. He wants to obliterate every world that's ever defied Imperial rule. Matthew's fists tight. The mantle of leadership settled heavily on his shoulders as he squared to face this new threat. Matthew's teeth gritted as he gazed at the holographic display. The combined Alliance Imperial fleet hung in the void, a tapestry of ships representing the fragile coalition he and Empress Ventara had forged. All units report ready, Commander. Lieutenant Kane's voice crackled over the comm. Understood. Commence operation. The fleet surged forward, engines flaring as they bore down on Drexen's shipyards. Matthew's eyes narrowed, searching for any sign of the Quantum Devastator. Plasma fire erupted from concealed defense platforms, bathing the Allied vanguard in searing light. Matthew gripped the command rail as his ship shuddered under the assault. Spectre teams, deploy, he barked. Across the battlefield, stealth dropships disgorged Kane's commandos. They swarmed over Drexen's installations like angry insects, planting explosives and engaging security forces in vicious close-quarters combat. A familiar voice cut through the din of battle. Matthew, we've got company! Zoe Nyagi's face appeared on a secondary display, her expression grim. Zircon's loyalists just dropped out of hyperspace. They're hitting our flank hard. Matthew swore under his breath. Damien, take your strike team and counter Zircon's push. We can't let them link up with Drexen's forces. As the battle raged, Matthew spotted a sleek tech fighter squadron weaving through the chaos. Cal Vero's voice crackled over the comm. We're approaching the primary target, commencing breach maneuvers. Matthew held his breath as Cal's fighters dove towards the half-constructed Quantum Devastator. Anti-aircraft fire filled the space around them, but the nimble craft dodged and weaved with inhuman precision. We're in, Cal shouted, deploying virohexes now. A cheer went up on the bridge, but it was short-lived. Alarms blared as new contacts appeared on the tactical display. Shock troops! Kane's voice was tight with tension. They've taken Cal and his team. We need extraction now. Matthew's mind raced, searching for options. But before he could issue orders, a new signal cut through the comm chatter. This is Jax Raven. We're moving to extract the prisoners. Matthew's eyes widened. Jax, what are you? But Raven had already cut the transmission. On the main view screen, Matthew watched as a ragtag fleet of ships bearing rebel markings emerged from the shipyard's shadows. They tore into Drexen's forces with surprising ferocity. In the ensuing chaos, fires spread through the shipyards as the virohexes took hold. The half-finished Quantum Devastator lurched, its structural integrity compromised. Matthew! Zoe's panicked voice filled the bridge. Zircon's troops, they're... The transmission dissolved into static. Matthew's heart clenched as he saw Zoe's fighter spiraling out of control, trailing smoke and debris. On another feed, he glimpsed Damien locked in furious hand-to-hand combat with General Zircon himself. The two were a blur of savage strikes and counters, neither willing to yield. A blinding flash erupted from the Quantum Devastator. Matthew's tactical officer gasped. Sir, it's powering up. They're targeting the Altarian system. Matthew watched in horror as the crippled superweapon unleashed its fury. A lance of energy tore across space, engulfing a populated world in searing light. As quickly as it fired, the Devastator's power core imploded. The massive structure folded in on itself, consumed by its own impossible energies. In the stunned silence that followed, Matthew's comm chirped. It was Empress Ventara. Commander Henry, her voice was steady despite the strain evident on her face. You know what we must do. Matthew nodded grimly. Yes, Your Majesty. We stay the course. He turned to his bridge crew, steeling himself for the battles yet to come. Track Zircon's escape vector. We're going after him. As reports of the Devastator's attack flooded in, threatening to unravel everything they'd built, Matthew focused on the task at hand. There would be time for mourning later. For now, they had a war to end. Matthew's eyes narrowed as the tactical display updated, a blinking red dot signaling Zircon's escape vector. Helm, set course for the Necrosis Nebula. Maximum speed. The Alliance flagship surged forward, its engines straining as it led the battered fleet in pursuit. Matthew turned to Kane, his face grim. Assemble our best. We end this now. Hours later, Matthew found himself aboard a stealth insertion craft, surrounded by a hand-picked team of Alliance and Imperial operatives. Damian Hex checked his weapons, nodding silently to Matthew. Tavis Kane studied a holographic schematic, his brow furrowed in concentration. As they penetrated the nebula's swirling ionized gases, proximity alarms shrieked. Matthew gripped his harness as the pilot executed a series of gut-wrenching, evasive maneuvers. Zircon's outer defenses erupted around them, filling space with searing plasma bolts and clusters of proximity mines. 30 seconds to insertion, the pilot shouted over the din. Matthew steeled himself. Remember, our primary objective is to neutralize Zircon and whatever weapon he's cobbled together. But keep your eyes open for Admiral Drexen's people. Intel suggests they may be held captive. The insertion craft shuddered violently as it touched down. Matthew was first out the hatch, plasma rifle at the ready. His team fanned out, securing the landing zone with practiced efficiency. Before them loomed Zircon's stronghold, a sprawling, fortress-like structure that seemed to have been carved directly from the asteroids of the nebula. Matthew's throat tightened as he took in the scale of the operation. Move out, he ordered, voice low. Stay sharp. They fought their way through twisting corridors and cavernous chambers, each step bringing them closer to the heart of Zircon's operation. The air crackled with weapons fire and the acrid stench of ozone. As they breached the central chamber, Matthew's eyes widened in horror. There, dominating the vast space, was a nightmarish amalgamation of ship hulls and salvaged Devastator components. Even in its unfinished state, the crude doomsday device radiated malevolent power. By the stars, Kane whispered, his face pale. Movement caught Matthew's attention. A group of haggard, terrified figures in Imperial uniforms were being forced at gunpoint to work on the device. Admiral Drexen's captured staff. Before Matthew could formulate a plan, the chamber erupted in chaos. Zircon's fanatics poured in from hidden alcoves, their faces twisted with zealous fury. The air filled with plasma bolts and shrapnel as the three-way battle exploded into life. Matthew dove for cover, returning fire as he shouted orders to his team. Through the melee, he caught glimpses of Damian Hex locked in furious combat with Zircon himself. The two warriors moved with inhuman speed, their blades clashing in a deadly dance. Just as the tide began to turn in their favor, a bone-chilling klaxon cut through the din. Matthew's blood ran cold as he realized what was happening. Zircon had activated the device. But something was wrong. Instead of powering up the weapon, Zircon was venting reactor emissions throughout the forge. The air grew thick and heavy, crackling with almost unchecked energy. Zircon's voice, filled with mad triumph, rang out over the battle. If I cannot rule, then let us all burn together. Matthew's mind raced. They had precious little time before the entire nebula was consumed in a chain reaction. He turned to Kane, who nodded grimly, already understanding what needed to be done. As Kane led the desperate charge to stabilize the reactor, Matthew fought his way towards Damian and Zircon. The future of the cosmos hung in the balance, and the final confrontation was at hand.
You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.